So, you've put all your stuff in the cloud. Who's actually in charge of keeping it safe? Let's be real. Is it the huge, multi-billion-dollar company that runs the servers, or is it you? Well, the answer might just surprise you, and it all comes down to a concept called the shared responsibility model, and a massive data breach that shows exactly what happens when people get it wrong.
To really get a handle on what's at stake here, we're not just going to talk theory. We're going to dive straight into a real-world disaster. I'm talking about a massive breach that hit one of the biggest names in the financial world. So back in 2019, Capital One, the credit card and banking giant, suffered an absolutely catastrophic data breach. And here's the kicker. All of that super sensitive customer data, it was sitting on Amazon Web Services, or AWS, which is like one of the biggest cloud providers on the entire planet.
And when I say this was big, I am not kidding. The sheer scale was just staggering. We're talking about more than 100 million people. Yeah, 100 million people in the US and Canada had their personal information exposed. This was not a small leak. This was a flood.
I mean, the vault of personal data was just blown wide open. We're not talking about just names here. No. We're talking about the keys to people's financial lives, social security numbers, bank accounts, credit scores, literally everything a hacker could ever dream of to steal someone's identity.
So this brings us to the billion-dollar question, right? You have a major bank using a top-tier cloud provider, and they get completely owned. So who's to blame? Who's on the hook for this disaster? Was it AWS's fault for not securing their cloud, or was this whole thing on Capital One?
To answer that, we need to pull back the curtain and understand a fundamental framework that governs pretty much all of cloud computing. It's called the shared responsibility model.
At its core, this model is basically a deal. It's an agreement that splits up all the security jobs. It draws a very clear line in the sand, defining what the cloud provider handles and what the customer, that's you, is expected to take care of. And really, it all boils down to a simple but absolutely critical distinction. The provider is responsible for the security of the cloud. Think of the physical data centers, the servers, the networking, the actual hardware. Your job is security in the cloud. This means your data, your applications, and crucially, how you configure everything. Okay, so with that framework in mind, let's go back to the scene of the crime. Where did things actually go so wrong for Capital One?
The attack happened in late March, but here's the truly shocking part. The breach wasn't even discovered until July, almost 4 months later. That is a huge window for an attacker to be roaming around completely undetected inside a major bank's network.
So what was this crazy, sophisticated vulnerability? Well, it wasn't. It was a misconfigured web application firewall, a WAF. It was basically a simple human error. This mistake created an opening that allowed the attacker to trick the server into making requests for them, which is a technique known as a server-side request forgery attack. And here it is. This is the smoking gun. In their official statement, AWS made it crystal clear. The problem wasn't some flaw in their global infrastructure, it was how the customer configured their own security settings within that infrastructure.
So, the verdict is in. When you map this whole incident back to our model, configuring a firewall falls squarely under security in the cloud. That means it was Capital One's responsibility, and that's precisely where the failure happened.
Now, you might be thinking this is just an AWS thing, but it's not, far from it. This model is the bedrock of the entire cloud industry.
It doesn't matter if you're using Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, or AWS, the same fundamental principle applies. They secure their platform, you secure what you put on it.
Now, how much you have to manage really depends on the type of service you're using. So let's look at this chart. With Infrastructure as a Service, or IaaS, the provider handles the physical stuff, but you manage almost everything else, the operating system, the apps, the data. With Platform as a Service, or PaaS, they handle a bit more, like the OS, so you can just focus on your apps. And finally, with Software as a Service, or SaaS, think about stuff like Gmail or Salesforce. The provider manages almost everything, but as you'll see, not quite everything.
But just look at the one constant across every single one of those models. You, the customer, are always responsible for two incredibly critical things: protecting your data and managing who has access to it. That part never goes away.
But this model isn't perfect. In fact, its greatest strength, this clear division of responsibility, also creates a subtle but really significant danger.
I love this quote from a security expert. It basically points out that when two teams share responsibility, there's always a risk that something just falls through the cracks.
right in the space between their defined roles.
And this gap, well, this is where hackers thrive. They exploit those gray areas where the customer just assumes the provider is handling something, and the provider assumes the customer is. It's a dangerous blind spot built entirely on assumptions.
This all brings us back to one clear, unavoidable conclusion for pretty much anyone using the cloud today. According to the research from Gartner, by 2025, a staggering 99% of all cloud security failures will be the customer's fault. Let that just sink in. Not the providers, the customers. That means you and me.
So the most important thing is knowing what falls on your plate. This means managing who has access and using strong authentication. It means properly configuring your firewalls and network settings. It means encrypting your data, patching your applications, and making sure you're meeting whatever compliance rules your industry has. The cloud provider gives you the tools, but you have to be the one to use them correctly. And this all brings us to our final thought. From your personal photos to your company's entire infrastructure, you are living in the cloud every single day. The question is, after everything we've just seen, are you certain you know where your responsibility begins and ends? Because in the cloud, what you don't know can absolutely hurt you.